The late summer sun filtered through the pines, casting long shadows over the gravel road that led to the secluded cabin. The structure stood like a relic from another time, its logs weathered by years of wind and rain, but still strong and proud against the wilderness. Birds called from high in the branches, their songs carrying into the stillness. For most people, this would have been a retreat, a quiet place to escape the noise of the world. But for Karen, it was a stage, a place where she could exert control, where her loud voice carried like an echo, demanding attention. She had been watching the cabin since the day the man arrived. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a stern face that seemed to carry decades of weight behind his eyes. He moved with precision, every action deliberate, every step calculated. To Karen, who thrived on gossip and assumptions, this was unsettling. He didn't smile at neighbors. He didn't chat in the local store. He kept to himself. In her mind, that alone made him suspicious. Karen lived in a vacation home nearby, dragging her teenage son along each summer under the guise of family bonding. In reality, she used the time to lord over the few cabins within the association, making sure people followed the rules she had helped write years ago. The cabin community had an informal agreement about appearances, noise levels, and the use of shared trails. Karen had crowned herself the unofficial enforcer of these rules. She liked to call it keeping the neighborhood safe. Others simply called it meddling. When the stranger appeared at the old cabin, her instincts kicked in. She saw the way he arrived without fanfare, driving a nondescript truck, carrying only a few duffel bags. He had no visible family, no loud music, no chatter. Just silence, and the tension came to a head one warm afternoon. Karen spotted her son peeking through the trees near the man's cabin, curiosity pulling him closer. Her son whispered later about seeing something unusual: maps spread across a table, old military gear tucked away in boxes, and the man himself sitting silently on the porch, staring into the forest as though guarding it. For Karen, this was all the proof she needed. In her mind, he wasn't just a recluse, he was dangerous. That day, she marched down the gravel road, her sandals slapping against the dirt, her voice already raised before she even reached the cabin. Her son trailed behind, both embarrassed and secretly thrilled, knowing his mother's antics always led to spectacle. The man was stacking firewood when Karen's shouting cut through the quiet air. Birds scattered from the trees, startled by her shrill accusations. She gestured wildly at him, waving her arms as if she could force him to answer her barrage of questions. What was he doing there? Why did he look so suspicious? Why was her son talking about weapons and maps? The man didn't respond the way she expected. He didn't shout back. He didn't defend himself. He stood still, his expression unreadable, his eyes fixed on her with the kind of patience that unnerved her more than anger would have. It was the look of someone used to chaos, someone who had endured far worse than the yelling of an entitled neighbor. But Karen thrived on escalation. The quieter he became, the louder she grew. She accused him of being a criminal, of hiding something, of endangering her community. She made sure her son stood close enough to hear every word, planting fear into him with each exaggerated claim. In the distance, a storm began to roll across the horizon, gray clouds gathering like an omen. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves as though the forest itself wanted to silence her. Still, she was convinced she had caught someone dangerous, and she would not let this moment slip by. Her accusations built into a fever pitch until finally she announced her next step. She spun on her heel, pulling out her phone, her fingers tapping with practiced speed. She dialed 911, her voice shaking as she spun a tale for the dispatcher. She claimed the man was armed, that he was behaving aggressively, that her son was terrified for his life. Each detail was exaggerated, twisted, reshaped into a story where she was the brave mother protecting her child from a lurking threat. Her son stood silently, watching as his mother painted the man into a monster. Deep down, even he wasn't sure if what he had seen was truly dangerous or just misunderstood. But Karen gave him no time to think. She pressed her arm protectively around him, speaking louder into the phone as though performing for an audience. The man continued stacking the wood. His movements never wavered, never faltered. To an outsider, it might have looked like indifference. To someone who knew better, it was discipline, an ability to stay calm even while the world shouted in his face. When the call ended, Karen stood triumphantly, convinced that the law would soon descend on the cabin and expose whatever secrets this stranger was hiding. The storm clouds darkened overhead, thunder rumbling through the forest. The man placed the final log onto the stack, then straightened. his gaze shifting toward the distant road where sirens would soon wail. His expression didn't change, but there was a heaviness in his eyes, as though he had seen this play out before, in different forms, in different places. For Karen, the story was simple. A mysterious, dangerous man had invaded her peaceful summer retreat, and she had acted heroically to stop him. For the man, it was another conflict. Minutes ticked by, heavy with anticipation. Karen whispered to her son about how brave she had been, how grateful everyone in the community would be once this man was gone. She didn't notice the way her son glanced back at the cabin, unease settling into his stomach. Something about the man's composure didn't match her story. Something about the silence of the woods felt unnatural, as though everything was waiting for what came next. And then, faint at first, the sound of sirens cut through the storm. The vehicles drew closer, their lights flickering red and blue through the trees. Karen straightened with pride, clutching her son's hand. She was ready for her moment of vindication. She imagined officers rushing out, demanding answers, dragging the stranger away in handcuffs. She imagined applause from the neighbors, recognition of her bravery. But the man simply stood at the edge of the porch, waiting. His posture was calm, almost commanding, as if he had been through situations far more intense than this. As the first police car rolled into view, kicking up gravel and dust, Karen's voice grew shrill with excitement. She waved her arms wildly, pointing at the cabin, shouting about danger. The man didn't move. His eyes locked on the approaching vehicle, steady and unyielding. The moment of truth was seconds away, and though Karen was certain she knew how it would unfold, she had no idea that the world she had built in her head was about to crumble. The officers would step out, and instead of the dramatic arrest she craved, something far more shocking would happen, something that would leave her son staring in disbelief, and her own confidence shattering like glass. The storm broke overhead, lightning splitting the sky as the patrol car came. The sirens cut sharply through the forest air, bouncing off the tall pines like a warning. Karen straightened her back, pulling her son closer as the patrol car skidded to a stop. The flashing lights painted the cabin red and blue, casting shadows that danced across the weathered logs. For her, it was the moment of triumph, the validation of her fears, the reward for her vigilance. She imagined the story spreading through the neighborhood before the evening ended. Karen, the mother who saved everyone from danger. The door of the patrol car opened slowly. Out stepped an officer in his 30s, posture rigid, eyes scanning the scene with trained focus. His boots crunched against the gravel as he took in Karen's frantic waving, her son's uneasy stance, and the silent man on the cabin porch. The officer's hand rested near his holster, but he didn't draw. He assessed, weighed, and waited. Karen wasted no time. She launched into her performance, voice high and strained, recounting her version of events with practiced exaggeration. She described a man who was aggressive, threatening, suspicious. She painted him as a danger not only to her son but to the entire community. Each word dripped with self-importance, each sentence crafted to make her the hero. The officer listened, but his gaze kept drifting back to the man on the porch. Something about his stillness, his composure, was unusual. Most people shouted, protested, or at least shifted nervously when accused. But this man remained motionless, his hands visible, his stance almost commanding. The officer approached cautiously, his eyes narrowing. He asked for identification, his tone firm but professional. Karen leaned forward eagerly, waiting for the man to stumble, to falter, to reveal some criminal truth. Instead, the man moved with measured calm. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a worn leather wallet, and handed over an ID. He checked again, glancing from the card to the man, then back to the card. Something in his demeanor shifted, subtle, but noticeable. Karen didn't catch it. She was too busy feeding the narrative, insisting that her son had seen maps, gear, and strange behavior that only someone dangerous would display. She gestured wildly toward the cabin, demanding that the officer search it immediately. The officer raised a hand, silencing her mid-rant. He walked back toward his patrol car, radioing in details. Karen strained to listen, but the static and clipped responses made it impossible to catch everything. Her son, meanwhile, kept his eyes fixed on the man, confusion written across his face. Nothing about this felt like the grand victory his mother expected. Minutes stretched long in the heavy air. The storm clouds thickened above, thunder rolling in the distance. Another patrol car arrived, then a third. Officers stepped out, their movements precise, their eyes focused not on Karen, but on the man. They didn't rush him, didn't bark commands. They approached slowly, deliberately, like soldiers approaching a superior. Karen's confidence began to waver. She tugged at her son's arm, whispering reassurances, but her voice lacked the certainty it once carried. She expected a spectacle, a dramatic arrest. Instead, she felt something building in the air, an energy that didn't align with her story. The first officer returned, his expression unreadable. He didn't look at Karen. He looked at the man, his gaze steady, almost respectful. Then, in a moment that froze the air, he gave a small but unmistakable gesture, a nod of acknowledgement, not of authority, but of deference. Karen blinked, stunned. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. Her son's grip tightened on her hand, his eyes wide. He sensed it too, the balance of power had shifted, and it was not in their favor. The man finally moved, stepping down from the porch with measured strides. The officers didn't stop him. They didn't reach for their weapons. They parted slightly, as though making space for someone of rank. Karen's heart pounded, her certainty crumbling with each passing second. She had built a story where she was the protector, the hero. But now, she was standing in the presence of something far greater, something she didn't understand. The storm broke above, rain beginning to fall in heavy drops, washing the dust from the road. The flashing lights reflected off the wet ground, painting the scene in surreal colors. Karen felt suddenly small, her voice drowned out by the storm, her accusations meaningless against the silent weight of what stood before her. She couldn't have known it yet, but the moment the officer saluted would mark the end of her illusion, and the beginning of a truth far more dangerous than anything she had imagined. The rain poured steadily now, soaking the gravel road, plastering Karen's hair against her face. She barely noticed, her focus locked on the scene unfolding before her. The officer who had first arrived straightened, his right hand rising in a crisp, deliberate salute. Karen's breath caught. Her son's grip on her hand tightened until it hurt. The man on the porch, no longer just a mysterious stranger, acknowledged the salute with the faintest nod. His eyes remained steady, his expression unchanged, but in that silent exchange, the truth began to reveal itself. The other officers followed suit. Their postures shifted, their tones lowered. They weren't confronting a suspect anymore. They were recognizing authority, an authority that came not from fear, but from respect. Karen's mind reeled. She had called 911 expecting the law to confirm her suspicions. Instead, the law was standing in formation around the very man she had accused. The first officer's voice cut through the rain, steady and formal. Though Karen couldn't hear every word, the tone was unmistakable: deference, protocol, recognition. She caught fragments: Major General, retired service, national commendations. Her son's eyes widened. He whispered under his breath, though the rain drowned his words. He had seen something in that cabin, yes, maps, gear, a presence that felt dangerous. But now, in this moment, it wasn't the danger of a criminal. It was the weight of a man who had lived through battles most people could never imagine, a man who carried scars invisible to the untrained eye. Karen's knees trembled. She tried to protest, to raise her voice over the storm, insisting that none of this changed the fact that he was suspicious. But her words faltered. No one was listening. The officers surrounded the general, not as captors, but as protectors. They didn't search his cabin. They didn't question his presence. Instead, they exchanged words of respect, brief and quiet, acknowledging his service. Karen's son looked at her with something she had never seen before: doubt. For the first time, he questioned her certainty, her version of events. His trust wavered, and Karen felt it like a blade. The general turned finally, his eyes settling on Karen. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His gaze was enough, a reminder of the gravity of her mistake. In those eyes, she saw decades of service, decisions made in war, lives weighed and measured. He was dangerous, yes, but not in the way she had imagined. The storm raged around them, and Karen realized the story had slipped from her hands. She wasn't the hero. She wasn't the protector. She was the antagonist in a narrative far larger than herself. The officers stood with the general, their respect unwavering. And Karen, drenched and trembling, felt the crushing weight of her own folly. The storm lingered into the night, lightning illuminating the cabin in sharp flashes. Karen sat in her own vacation home, her son silent beside her. For the first time, her words failed to fill the air. She replayed the scene endlessly: the salute, the respect, the way her story had crumbled in an instant. The community soon learned the truth. Whispers spread through the cabins. carried from porch to porch, from phone call to phone call. The man she had accused was no criminal. He was a retired major general, a decorated leader who had commanded troops in conflicts overseas, who had dedicated decades to service. He had chosen the cabin as a retreat, a place to find peace after years of burden. But Karen had shattered that peace with her suspicion, her need for control. Her neighbors avoided her now, their glances sharp, their words clipped. She had not only embarrassed herself, she had humiliated the community by dragging law enforcement into a false alarm. The officers themselves returned in the following days, not to question the general, but to check on him, to ensure he had what he needed. Their presence alone confirmed his standing. Karen's son withdrew, spending hours alone, processing what he had seen. He no longer looked at his mother with admiration. Instead, he carried the quiet disappointment of someone who had glimpsed the truth behind the mask. The general remained silent. He didn't retaliate, didn't seek revenge. But his stillness spoke volumes. To those who understood, it was the quiet strength of a man who had faced far worse than false accusations. To Karen, it was a mirror, forcing her to confront her own pettiness. Over time, the story solidified. Karen had tried to paint herself as a hero, but history would remember her differently. She was the woman who had called 911 on a man who had given his life to protect the very freedoms she took for granted. She was the cautionary tale, the reminder of what happens when suspicion overpowers reason.